Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the new audio functions in Cubase 11. When we want to work with sculpting our sound, we're going to have some new plugins that will come with Cubase that can really help. And some of the plugins have just been updated for some new functionality. So if I wanted to go to my master bus for this recording, we could open up an Imager plugin. And we see our Imager plugin. It used to previously just be a single band. And problems with that could be you can make your mix sound wider, but often the low end can get a bit floppy and kind of undefined. So if I wanted to make my low end, we could adjust different frequency bands where we could adjust the stereo width on different frequencies. So if I wanted to make my low end a little tighter, more kind of mono, we could do that very easily using the Imager. And if I wanted my upper mids, and we could solo each band, we could adjust the frequency of each of the bands. And if I wanted those frequencies to be a little wider, and we can see this display being reflected in the little phase scope there within the plugin. And I wanted my highs to be wider as well. So just kind of doing a little few tweaks here we could bypass. So really nice for bringing out certain tracks and individual tracks, or just using it to really kind of be very surgical on a 2-track mix. If I wanted to look at some of the powerful new features in the frequency EQ, so this is an 8-band linear phase EQ. We could do a lot of great things. We can see our display here, but we could of frequencies, but we could also activate kind of the listen mode. So as I make an adjustment here, it'll just hear exactly what we're adjusting. So now I let go, and we're right back. So as you're making your EQ adjustments, you could hear exactly what you're affecting. Each EQ band, we could adjust the mid and side independently. So if I wanted to EQ just kind of the outer edges of the panning spectrum, or just the middle part of the panning, or we could do left and right independently. So if I wanted to EQ a piano with one band to have different EQs for my lows and my high frequencies, for different EQs for the left and right rather. And as we work with this, we could also just determine frequencies in a very musical way. So if we know that the song is in the key of G, I could go to the frequency range here and just kind of type in G4 and hit enter, and we could just narrow in on that particular frequency. One thing that customers had requested was the ability to take each of the bands here within the frequency and to enable a dynamic mode. So now we could click on the dynamic button and switch to have dynamic control over each of the frequency bands that we want to work with. So I could switch and toggle back and forth between my dynamics as well as my EQ with one mouse click. If I wanted to see both of those simultaneously, I could change the display where we could now see all the different settings for the particular channel. One of the new plugins that was introduced was a up-down compressor, and this could be kind of a very aggressive type of compression. It's often used in dance music, and this plugin is called Squasher. So let's go ahead and I'll just have it open it up on a track here where I have the kick and snare and the rest of the track kind of isolated, and we'll go ahead and listen to this. So if I wanted to listen to just the effect of the kick, so this is an up-down compressor. So let's just put it on the kick. And let's put it on the rest of the mix. So when you need to have that kind of glue in the mix or have parts kind of pop out, And as we look at this, we can say that we're going to have our different controls. We could have a mix blend. We have a drive on each individual band. So again, I'll bypass it on the kick. Bypass on the main mix. So on the kick again. So we want that kick to kind of pop through the mix. It's a great tool for that. So you can hear what a difference that makes, just giving you that character mix that's often, very useful for EDM and dance music. Make those tracks just kind of pop out. Now, one thing that's really interesting about the Squasher plugin is the side chaining functionality. So when we activate kind of the side chains here, we notice that each band could be side chainable. And when we go to set up your side chain for this particular plugin, each band could have its own unique side chain input. So I could have on a master mix, have a kick drive one band, a snare drive another, and a vocal be the side chain input for a different band. And we said, okay, if we could have 3 inputs for our side chain plugin, how many could we have for let's say a plugin like frequency? So as we want to work with our frequency plugin, we could open that up, and as we look at frequency, we can for each band of frequency, we could activate your side chain. So we could have 8 independent side chains just within frequency itself. So you can see some of the new powerful additions to plugins that come with Cubase. But let's take a look. Also, something that's going to be very critical is, metering, and we have, fantastic meters kind of in our project already. But let's say I just want to look at my meters here on my control room. We could choose to look at our level meters in different scales. If I want to see like Cat System 20, or if I want to see my loudness units. But often we may want to actually work with meters in kind of maybe on an individual track basis, or to have a little more control over some of the meters. And we could do this with the new Supervision plugin. So as we open this up, we can find this under the Analyzer section. We could open Supervision, and we start off with it looking like a basic meter. So we could have this kind of resized, but if we think of this as being just a single meter, it's kind of a bit of an understatement, because we could have up to 18 different meters going on with frequency. So if I wanted to see my level, and each of these plugins could have kind of their own unique settings. So let's go ahead and take a look. I'll just make this plugin just a little bit smaller here to start off. And let's take some of our settings. So I can open up my settings for each of the different meter options. So say on my meter, we could choose different points. So if I wanted to meter only the left channel, the right channel, my mid or side. So let's say we'll just do our stereo bus. But let's say instead of just being a digital meter, I want it to be DIN. I want to switch between my Cat System 20, 14, 12. We could have all of those different metering options that are available. And we could also choose kind of different the release, what colors we want. So if we want it to be kind of scaled meters or track meter colors. If I wanted to switch this to being a loudness meter, we could just kind of change the orientation of the meter to be more kind of vertical. So as we work with that, and if I wanted this to be, you know, just loudness units full scale, we could also choose to look at this. If you're going to set the threshold to -23 for broadcast or -14 for different streaming services, you have that option. Let's go to our spectrum curve, and we'll just kind of make this a little larger here. And even as I hover over, we can see what frequencies are being kind of highlighted and are peaking very easily. And you could also choose to have different bands or multi-bands when you work with that. Let's look at our spectrum bar. And as I want to look at this, we could say, how many bands do I want this to be? Do I want it 3 bands per octave? Or do I want it up to 24 bands per octave? Some other spectrum meters, we're going to have a spectrum intensity. So we can see kind of what frequencies have their own levels of intensity going on, as well as a spectrogram, where you can see a live spectrogram. And if we wanted to kind of change the color scheme of this, like say I want it to be more dark, light, or even kind of more plasma, magma, so different coloring schemes to really kind of highlight particular frequencies. And let's go ahead and look at if we wanted to go to our chromogram as well. And again, we could just have lots of different options. Let's look at our phase scope. And as I want to look at phase, I could just come right over here and say, okay, let's look at that in, if I see it in dots or directly in an envelope. And we could turn off different zoom functions. So as we want to customize that, you could also see kind of our panorama, where we are kind of with different panning distribution. And we could look at it with our multi-panorama. Again, similar coloring options that we've seen before. We can see our correlation meter, a multi-correlation meter, and we could kind of change this perspective from vertical to horizontal if needed. There will also be different surround. So if you want to see your surround meter or ambisonics meter, you could also look at an oscilloscope. A wave scope. Wave circles. Or if you wanted to see it represented in time, and you could change your different time format. So if you wanted to see it in SMPTE time code or bars and beats, or beats rather. So when kind of working with this, it's very easy to just open up kind of your Supervision plugin, have it on a dedicated screen, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. So, but when working with it also, if I wanted to add additional meters, I could say, let's start with our loudness meter or level, and then we could click on this little division line, so I could divide it vertically or horizontally, and I could just say, for this zone, I want it to be, let's say, a spectrum bar, and I wanted to divide that horizontally now. I could say I want this to be my phase scope, and you could just kind of configure the different meters as you see fit, and you can have up to 9 different meters within a single instance of Supervision. So if I was here and wanted to now switch to, this is a preset that I had made, showing some of the different metering options. And if I wanted to look at kind of my secondary meter, there's another preset view. And you could just have these kind of all going on at once to really give you incredibly powerful insight as to what is going on in your project. And in Cubase, I could just run this on the control room so I get an idea of exactly what's going on with my system at all times and just leave it open on a dedicated monitor. One of the things that Steinberg also wanted to do is provide kind of a new editing environment, and with Cubase 11 we've included Spectral Layers 1, and this is a very powerful spectral editor. So a lot of times we may run into different recording scenarios that we have to solve that could be problem based, and many times when we look at a particular waveform, we're kind of very used to seeing all of the different frequencies that are available, and if we do it in a cut in the traditional waveform, that we cut all of the frequencies, but we may want to just kind of be able to edit frequencies in particular ranges, and this is where Spectral Layers can be very powerful. So there's a Pro version and Elements version, but with the included version of Cubase, you get the Spectral Layers 1. So let's take a look at some of what we can do. So I'm going to just select an audio file, and a lot of times when we do this, we can see it go directly into a sample editor. But what I want to do is to have this go directly to an extension. So I could go to an ARA2 extension, and I'll just say, let's go ahead and launch Spectral Layers. And as we do this, it's doing its analysis. I'm going to switch my view here. And as we look at this, we could say, it could look a little foreign at first, but what it is basically kind of taking the waveform, so our traditional waveform, and we're kind of looking at the frequency distribution here. So I could see kind of the harmonic overtone series if I wanted to be able to look at my frequencies here. So these will be at the bottom, kind of my low frequencies, and as we go to up, these will be kind of my mid-range as we go up, and my high frequencies kind of up vertically. So I did a recording where I just wanted to show some of the stuff that you could do within Spectral Layers. And another view you could get is just kind of looking at the three-dimensional view. So it's almost like taking the waveform and flipping it on its side. So let's say I did a recording, and I just did a recording of my voice, and let's say I had a big breath, and I had a perfectly good recording, and I just wanted to get rid of that breath. So here's a recording of me saying that. And you may have to want to listen to this with headphones, but let's take a quick listen. You may blow into the microphone accidentally. So I'm going to just kind of zoom in on the frequencies, and I could just kind of hover here in my time domain to get the frequencies, to zoom on my time, and I will zoom in on the frequencies by hovering over the frequency axis with my mouse scroll wheel. And let's go ahead and I'll just navigate down. So what we want to do is get rid of this breath. So if you had a perfectly great vocal and someone tapped the mic stand, or they had kind of a plosive, at this point I'm going to go to my selection tool, select elliptical, and I will just kind of select those range of frequencies, hit the delete key a couple of times. I'll click in a different area, and now we've edited out just that particular breath out of the file. So we'll go ahead and play. To the microphone accidentally. And you could just take out, if you have a guitar squeak, if you have a piano pedal squeak, stuff like that, you could take those frequencies out very easily. Now, one of the great, incredibly powerful aspects when kind of working with Spectral Layers is the ability to, remove different vocals, or remove vocals from an audio file. So let's say if I wanted to add events, and I was doing a lot of spectral editing for a particular project, and I wanted that to almost be kind of the default editor, I could click on Add Event and then just select a different event, and that will launch that event directly into Spectral Layers. So I will come over here. Let's go ahead and I'll just take it back out of my full screen view, and I'll just come right here and let's listen to kind of a 2-track mix that we have. So this is just a stereo recording, and we're going to have so we have kind of percussion, bass, guitar, and vocal. So I want to go to my layers, and at this point I'm going to choose unmix vocals, and I'll select OK. So what we're able to do now, it's going to do its processing. I'll take it back to our lower zone view. As soon as we get done. So, and now what it's done is kind of the voodoo aspect, and I could play this file, and let's go ahead and just kind of mute the vocals independently. So let's say I'll just take the file, and as the singer is coming in, I can have my backing tracks or just. So if we were to kind of make an analogy, this is almost like taking the eggs out of the cake after it's been baked. And one of the powerful things is I could grab this particular layer, drag it into my project window, and I'll hit OK. And at this point, I have my backing track from my vocals separated. So if we come right over here, we'll jump in. No, I don't care about what you've got to say. No, I don't care when I say it to your face. So you can see how effective that really is. Now, many times when people are done with the project, the most tedious, arduous process is actually being able to deliver the projects. So let's say if we wanted to listen to a quick orchestral example here. And we needed to deliver this in different configurations and different file formats for different parts of the production process. So the inclusion of the job export cues with the export audio mixdown can really simplify this process. So if I wanted to take my project here, let's go to our audio mixdown. We can now see our export cues. And as we wanted to open those up, we could choose to say, deliver different formats for different people. So let's say the director of the film wants to have an MP3 file of the project emailed to them so they could listen to it in the car. So we could come here and say we want an MP3 at 320K. I want this to be interleaved, and now we add it to the queue. For these different scenarios, we could actually save presets. If someone needs a audio CD burned to listen to in their car ride home, we could choose a WAV file at 16-bit 44.1 and add that to the queue. Again, we could save that as a preset. If the video editor needs a WAV file at 48K, that is going to be stereo split, and we could just add that to our queue. We could also work with cycle markers. So if we have multiple projects or queues, or maybe a live recording, we could export each of these individually based on cycle markers. Now, when we want to work with multiple files and delivering stems, I could select all my different components, and we have a lot of additional new signal options. So we could say, I want to deliver this dry because someone else is going to be mixing and they don't want any of the EQs, effects that I've delivered. And I want to maintain my channel width so that my stereo files will be stereo and my mono files will be mono. And as we do this, there's also different naming conventions, because sometimes if people put every audio file for mixdowns within a single folder, that could be problematic as well. So we have naming schemes. So we could say I wanted to have the name of the channel, the name of the project, and we could even have free text. So if you want to put BPM or put your name associated with your composed by in every single audio file, and you can see a preview of that. And we could also have a dedicated project mixdown folder. So this way we have all the mixdown files going into a separate unique folder still within the project folder itself if you want it. So if I wanted to deliver all of my projects and all the files in the project without any effects, I could just choose disabled, and let's add that to the queue. Now I wanted to include all of my effects. So let's say all of my effects sends, my groups. So as we look at it, we could choose to have we could choose this selection here. So we say outputs and sends. So if I have a reverb that's going on my snare and my kick, but more of that reverb via the send is on the channel, the snare track will get rendered with the correct amount of reverb, and the kick will get rendered with the amount of reverb determined by the send in the mix. So, and I want to do this because I don't want to include my master effects because it's going to be going to mastering. So I will add that particular function, that scenario, to our Q mix. And when we come, let's say I need to deliver all of my different stems for live performance with all of the master processing. At this point, we could include our master processing. So I will come right over here and let's add that to the queue. Now, the tedious part is, this is generally the part when all the creativity is done and gets to be very mechanical. So at this point, if we wanted to work with something that's a large template, and something that people do all the time is render empty files. And rendering empty files doesn't help you because it takes a lot longer, but it also doesn't help the person who's receiving empty files, because there's always the element of doubt of, is there a file missing? What's wrong? Why is this particular file empty? So we have the ability, and I made a quick project logical editor preset. And this is kind of a powerful thing you do, a kind of a conditional editor within Cubase. And I said what I want to do is to only select tracks that have events, and we could run this. So if we don't have a harp part in this performance, I don't want to render this as an empty audio file. So I will go to my export audio mixdown, and we have this little selection here. So I will select all of my different components, and we see that all of those scenarios I set up had been saved. And we could synchronize to only have the selected tracks show up in our list. So this way I don't render unnecessary, useless, empty audio files. So once I'm done with that, let's add that to our job queue. So a lot of times we see the composers live in the MIDI key editor, and their assistants that they have to hire to do all this live in the job export. So at this point, instead of doing this one by one, having to come back and kind of babysit the computer, what we're able to do is to just click on Start Queue Export. It will go through and export all these different scenarios that we've set up so that you could deliver the different file formats, the different configurations for different people to complete your production process. So we can see how powerful that is. So taking a quick look back at some of the new audio features in Cubase Pro 11, we're going to have the multi-band imager, the addition of the dynamics and the frequency EQ, the up-down compressor and squasher. You're going to have incredible flexibility in metering with the Supervision plugin. And then going into the ability to have new spectral editing environments to unmix vocals, to take different aspects out of mixes and problematic audio files, and the ability to deliver all of your different audio file formats with the job queue make it very powerful.